All I know is that whenever stuff like this happens, whenever huge loss of life happens like this, first thing you need to do is follow the money. What could have prevented this? And it usually comes down to money and poor decision making from oftentimes greedy or delusional Ocean Gate type men who are just like, it'll be fine. As a former outdoor adventure guide who worked mostly with children, a camp counselor, a whitewater raft guide who had swiftwater rescue. I was trained in that. Whenever one of these stories, and they are becoming more and more frequent, whenever one of these stories happens, whether it's because of a hurricane or flash flood or whatever, I obsessively watch the news. I mean, I think most people who know about this story can't help themselves but watch it a lot. And one of the reasons that I do is because I unfortunately can envision how all of that played out. I've been in so many dangerous situations due to being in nature, or just nature, like the weather or just the elements, creating life-threatening situations, and especially with children. So I don't know if this is some form of torture. I don't know, like, I've also witnessed 2 drownings in my life, on the river and then one in the ocean last summer. I was part of what was supposed to be a rescue and turned into body recovery my first day on the Rio Grande as a whitewater raft guide. So these stories hit pretty hard. And like everyone else who has seen this probably ends up spending way too much time trying to figure out who the fork's fault this is. Now, I am currently in Nashville. I'm wearing a down jacket because the AC is so strong. I'm freezing everywhere I go because America, although France, where I have been living for 7 years now, is unbearably hot now, and we'll probably have to start getting AC. But as I sit in wasting energy in a world facing life-threatening climate change more and more every year, reading these stories and thinking about my experience in the wilderness, I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm also visiting my family for the first time in 4 years. Just spent the last several days with my mom for the first time in 4 years, and other family, and so I'm trying to stay off these apps. But as soon as I get home, or wherever I'm sleeping that night, I can't stay off the news. And I think our strong reactions to these kind of crises tend to be stronger when it involves children dying horrifically. But in general, we tend to react more when children die horrifically. And so, of course, this story is getting a lot of headlines, but it's also, there's other components, because would we be talking about this as much if it wasn't a bunch of rich white girls? I don't know. Probably not. Well, I do know. No, we would not. Whole videos could be made on just that alone. I'm trying really hard to just not make content right now so that I can cherish this precious time with family, because I don't know when I will be back in the U.S. After this trip. But I can't stop reading this, and I thought maybe I should talk about it a little bit to help me process it, and maybe even help other people process it. One of the things I also just want to talk about, and let me know if you want me to do a separate video on water safety, because every time drownings happen, which happens a lot in the summertime, anything with floods or just swift water in general, because I've had so much experience in swift water, and I'm terrified of water now as a result of it. Not too terrified to go on it, but I respect it so much that I don't fork. I didn't fork with swift water. It is so dangerous. Let me know if you want me to do a separate video on reminding you of things to think about with swift water, because it seems like it's going to become more and more relevant. But what I want to talk about now is how, as much as everything is political. Everything comes down to policies, how money is spent, who money is spent on. And it's really telling when a camp that, Laura Bush was a counselor at, and a camp that cost $4,300 back in 2011. That's 14 years ago. I have no idea how much it costs now. A camp that when I spent like 30 minutes reading this one article, y'all. It's a good one. I mean, it's interesting. This was written in 2011 in the Texas Monthly. This camp was for super rich girls from the very beginning. Like super famous people, LBJ's daughters, granddaughters, great-granddaughters, like wealthy people's girls going and riding horses and shooting rifles and catching fish. The place where they go to, the mystic mafia, who go on to work for, executives for Neiman Marcus, who make connections that get them into, sorority. Like, this stuff's old, y'all. I don't care where my goddaughter goes to college, but I do care where she goes to camp, okay? Like, in the beginning of this camp, I'm just giving y'all an idea of what this camp is, its roots. Like, the original lady, AG, I just lost my light, so we're gonna have to use this one. I don't care. I gotta get through this, y'all. I'm so exhausted, and we leave for North Carolina tomorrow. Like, look, this feels like Rose in the Titanic. Corrective posturing. They urge campers to bring fancy dresses so they could go to dances with the boys nearby. Nurses in the dining hall to monitor campers who are under or overweight. But anyway, I don't know. Let me know if you want to go over this article. It's really, besides all this crap, this lady sounded really tough. It sounded like this camp was literally about, like, empowering girls, but also back when women were hostages, literal hostages, how to get financial security through marrying well, I guess, and performing patriarchy well. But it was not this huge Christian camp. That's what Dick, what's-his-face, and his wife did. His wife, Tweety, her most significant influence is to make it a faith central as a part of this camp. But then did all this. I don't know. I can go over this article if you want. But she added Bible study courses to the curriculum, offers input on devotionals that counselors lead before bedtime, and then there's a whole wall of her office that is lined with a collection of crosses. So this, like, Christian focus seems to have been more recent than its long history. And basically since the 80s, when personal injury lawyers became basically a shot at, like, lottery tickets. But anyway, a lot of this history of this family, there's been a big power struggle. They've been in the courts suing each other, and all of it was around, like, a lot of their fighting was about being sued, which is really telling. I actually heard someone say online that this dude who died saving the children, which I'm sure he cared about the kids. Although it's always weird to me when a man runs a girls' camp. But let's say none of that I'm suggesting was a factor at all. This was so reckless, the way they built this camp on a floodplain and refused to move these buildings despite climate change, a history of flooding. Like, why these young girls were so close to the water in such a dangerous place. That is what really pisses me off. But being sued has been a big part of their whole thing. And yet they didn't seem to have anything in place that really protected these campers. They had almost a game of telephone. From my understanding, they didn't have weather radio. They had a system in place, but why those children were not evacuated sooner, if not at all, seems to me to be a problem. Something to do with money and the way it's run. Because everything almost always comes down to money. But the quote online that I heard was someone say that this guy got off easy by dying. Because I honestly wouldn't be surprised if we find out more information in the coming days of why. Besides these lawsuits, like, there seems to be a lot of lawsuits within this family that was battling over this mystic camp, whatever, around power and money. So I don't know. It seems like at a certain point he could have paid to have either the cabins moved or, I don't know, a better alert system other than a game of literal telephone. I'm going to go into the articles that talk about what they had later on. I'm going to cite some stuff and show you some stuff. The reason why I'm going into all of this is that if a camp with some of the richest kids in Texas, I'm guessing. Or it used to be some of the Texas aristocracy. Oh my God. I'm brain dead right now in travel and just talking constantly. If this is how we're screwed. If this is what they're doing for the children of some of the richest people, who are usually wealthy white people. If a camp that has ties to such a long history of Laura Bush, and this is they let them get away with giving so few forks about the safety of the children of those people. That's very telling in terms of how much they care about us. And this is another reason why the fact that they are trying to privatize everything and remove the government regulation. Already things are probably, could use more regulation, clearly. Because this camp passed a test. Notice there's a lot of articles being 2 days before Camp Mystic passed the... Okay. But before I get into the articles, I just want to say this. 18 and 19-year-olds. I cannot imagine. I was a guide of children when I was in my 20s. At 23 to 26 or 27 or 28. I don't even remember. All I know is that I was into my 20s. Seeing that 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds responsible for the lives of all these kids. I cannot imagine what they're going through right now. As one of my biggest fears is that on my boats, someone would die on one of my boats. And, I usually was taking adults, but I took tons of kids down the river too. I was so afraid someone would die on one of my boats and I'd never be able to live with myself. And in the wilderness and any of the stuff I ever guided, especially with children, I was like, just please let me keep them safe. Because it's a huge responsibility. So what happened? None of those kids had cell phones. None of those kids had devices. Even Wikipedia, among many others, report the campers do not have access to electronics and are encouraged to write letters home. Parents are offered a one-way email service to contact their children. And as somebody, I am about to drop off my niece. We're going on a road trip, and she's going up north to a camp. She's not going to, for 2 weeks, and she's not going to have a device. They don't allow cell phones. So my sister won't be able to contact her if, for instance, she gets an alert that at this camp there's a flood or a fire or some terrible... My sister won't be able to contact her daughter, can't contact her mom, and no one's going to get these things. And I actually believe that's a good thing in terms of, kids, being able to be away from devices and all this other stuff. But if the kids do not have devices, those kids bought in a floodplain. We're sitting ducks, and we're completely dependent on adults to keep them safe. Because, I saw interviews with some of the survivors that they were terrified. There was thunder. It was, obviously raining really hard, and they're just waiting for instructions. They're counting on teenagers to save them. So were those teenagers properly trained on everything they're supposed to do? Were the teenagers, the camp counselors and then the older adults higher up, did they know what was happening? If not, why? There is no reason why kids should be sleeping that close to swift water with a record of flooding in a floodplain with no access to information. And let me tell you something else. Somebody who worked in the wilderness a long time and rarely had cell phone service, but even someone who lives in rural areas. When I lived in Taos, New Mexico, very rarely did my cell phone work where I lived. That's why I was so dangerous when I was in that abusive relationship. I had no way to call for help. Okay? So a lot of these people, even if they did have access to phones, they couldn't get they're not going to get the message to evacuate now or die. So, I don't know. To me, this is terrible decision making. And it's never just one thing, but people are rightfully so investigating their evacuation plans. Houston Chronicle did a whole article, this is the title. It talks about their evacuation plan. But multiple sources have said that they relied on other camps calling each camp and being like, hey, watch out. How well are they preparing these camp leaders, who are teenagers oftentimes, on how to deal with a crisis situation? Because I'm telling you what, in my mid-20s and late 20s, and I even went back and did it occasionally in my 30s, this is a lot of pressure. You have to be well informed. Before, you're supposed to know exactly what to do. Even if they knew exactly what to do, did they get the information? Because it still remains unclear how and when the camp was alerted to what was going on, and how much time the leaders and campers would have time to implement any of this. So the people, 3 out of 9 of the board members of the Upper Guadalupe River Authority, which promotes flood safety and warning, are local camp directors. And they got some transcripts and said they have an informal system among the camps along the river that help each other stay aware of water level. If there's a rise, they're phoning their competitors or colleagues downriver and letting them know what happened. That was according to someone in 2017, as they were contemplating adding systems of river monitors. It's informal, but it's a very good system to let them know over time. Clearly not. All it takes is one tragedy with the loss of life, a huge loss of life, for people to be like, maybe playing telephone during a catastrophe like this, it's not a great idea, not a great plan. I've been trying to find if this Camp Mystic had a weather radio. That seems like it would be helpful. Like, where was the communication breakdown? Because from everything I've read, it seems like it was at the camp. Obviously not the camp counselors, but coming from the top of not having adequate. Some of the videos you see, they're not at the camp. You hear, like it's tornado or I don't know, World War II, Anybody who, all over, even in my husband's village, they still have that siren. It goes off every once in a while as like a practice. You can hear it all over town. And every time it goes off, I'm like, is there something happening? But there's like a schedule when they practice it to make sure it's working. Why do they not have that on a floodplain? I'm sorry, but I don't want to rely on cell phones and crap like that, especially if it's a camp full of children who are not allowed to have cell phones. And also where the reception might not be so good. Because if you read articles like this, like the one in the Telegraph that Yahoo reposted or whatever, it seems like the girls were at the mercy of flash flood, and how officials in a Texan disaster hotspot known as Flash Flood Alley failed to act years ago. And now we have at least 28 children dead in one of the most lethal floods in U.S. history. It seems like every flood becomes the most lethal flood in U.S. history because this is where we're headed. This is a well-studied, high-risk flood zone, according to FEMA, in a zone with a 1% annual chance of flooding. This part right here is what really got me. Some of the cabins were located in what is known as the floodway, the main channel through which flood waters would flow in a 100-year event. In such zones, residential construction tend to be heavily restricted or banned. However, the bunks were built long before the restrictions were put in place. Now, you would think that if there are restrictions there and nothing new is allowed to be built there, that maybe those should be moved. I don't know. Especially someone who didn't want to get sued, was obsessed with getting sued. So this is what I mean, this guy may have avoided a lot of stuff in the future when we follow the money, because this will come out. The reason why we're talking about it right now, you have to talk about it right now, and it may seem like people are exploiting tragedy and whatever, but if you don't talk about why, people are going to forget about this. There were so many reasons why what happened in Asheville, and how a hurricane could have created so much flooding and disaster in the mountains of all places. I still want to know what happened with that Florida building that collapsed. God, what a horrifying story. If you don't start asking these questions early on, not making conclusions like, hey, this is why I'm asking questions. I'm giving you information and I'm telling you possibilities. But what we know so far, because people are asking these questions and are looking into the finances, looking into the history, the legal history, camp's history. And this is just about the camp. There's like over 100 people dead. There's more people who weren't with the camp who are dead. But because it's so many children, girls, and parents can relate to the parents who are mourning right now. Their anger is justified. The public's anger is justified. And people are asking hard questions. We know that we're not going to find answers for a while, but we need to be asking these hard questions now. For this whole story is forgotten about as if it never happened. Because look at this. Look at this cabin. Yellow line is where the water came up. All those beds were underwater. And look, there's hardly any room for those girls to get out of those windows. And I'm telling you, if they were in a swift water, doesn't matter. Swift water that pushes you against literally anything. The weight of water. If you have not been in a strainer before, I had to be in a strainer with swiftwater rescue training. We had to literally feel what it's like to be in a strainer, and I would never wish that on anybody. When water is pushing you against something, you're not getting out of it. It weighs, you can't move. If the water is, the volume and the speed of the water is enough, you're not moving. And also to put the youngest girls down there instead of up on Senior Hill or whatever. And because there were no sirens, like there's a lot of different things you can do. Sirens is one of them. And the town that had the sirens, none of those people died. I don't know. That seems to say a lot. Anyway, people who were in caravans and mobile homes in Kerr County were dependent on text. But when that stuff goes off at 1:14 in the morning and 4:03 in the morning, who is going to see that text if they even have cell phone service? So let's talk about what some of these commissioners did to set this up. You know, they've been debating these sirens and water gauges for a while. And this one dude says, I think this whole thing is a little extravagant for Kerr County. Sirens and such. Taking these funds out of the special projects from roads and bridge department ticks me off a little bit. Oh, does it? Let's see if I can find the photo that has this dude's name. His name should be in every article that mentions this quote because it's so gross. Screw people's lives. Screw safety. Let's build more roads. Let's put all the money on building roads rather than keeping people alive. As Mother Nature starts being like. And the money was already, instead of going towards this, the money was spent on cleaning up Hurricane Harvey. I don't know. How about let's just keep spending money on making climate worse with data centers too and everything else. And, you know, maybe cleaning up stuff that it does happen other than prevention. Same way we deal with health in this country. No prevention, no prevention. We just spend a ton of money on Band-Aids. And yet documents said that just months before this happened, they're talking about installing sirens along the Guadalupe River as a higher priority, and said the devices could be installed for relatively inexpensive, like $1,000 each. Sirens, basic sirens. I don't know. I mean, may not hear a text, but if I was laying in bed and I heard all over, I don't know. That would probably scare me. And again, this is not the first time this whole thing has flooded, because people are wanting to know why so many camps are situated so close to the river. One congressman, Chip Roy, who represents the area, says, you know, it's premature to blame. The response is going to be, we got to move all these camps. Why would you have camps down here by the water? Well, you have camps by the water because it's by water. You have camps by the river because it's beautiful and wonderful place to be. So all you people who are worried about us having cabins right in a floodplain, it's pretty. You stupid forks. Why wouldn't we have what? And that's not even the half of it. This freaking Abbott guy, governor, look at this. Look what he said. So there's 111 people dead. Maybe it's more. I can't keep up. It keeps rising. More than 170 are missing. Those people are probably dead. It's been, what, 5 or 6 days? 170 people missing are probably dead. Or probably in please do not be in a car. If it's up to your tires, do not, please get out of that car, or at least roll your windows down. You are in a death trap. This was his response when he was questioned about this. This is the least empathetic, most unhinged response. When asked about blame, he calls that the word choice of losers, and then goes into a whole rant about football. Every square inch of our state cares about football. What? Every football team makes mistakes. By the way, I want you to, this is the same thing they do with every man who's been Me Too'd. Every man, you know, I did that whole thing about the James Franco interview. This is what all of them do. Every single man who abuses, every single man, And it's not just men who do this, but white men love to do this. It's a mistake. I just made a mistake raping somebody. Well, I'm human. We all make mistakes. So he does this classic Darvo crap. And this is when the men become boys. I'm just a little boy who makes silly mistakes. We all make mistakes, don't we? And then when they want to use the arm of violence, now they're just... But this is when they become little boys. This is like weaponizing conflict. This is what men do in their homes. Oh, I didn't know. Oopsies. How could we have known this would happen on a floodplain with the history of it happening without adequate sirens or any kind of stuff like that? How could we know this was going to happen? But then he did this. He said even more about football. He extended the metaphor further, saying that losing team assigns blame while championship teams respond to mistakes by saying, we've got this. We're going to make sure that we score again, that we win this game. What are you talking about? This is not a game. Who's winning? God! Because he is just deflecting, because he and other prominent Republicans have pushed back against critics who have called for investigations into all this stuff. And then that Chip Roy finger pointing generally is just offensive when you deal with trying to find bodies, trying to deal with families grieving. See, this is what they do. Do not let them shame you. Do not let them shame you for wanting answers, for being angry, for caring, wanting to know what policy was behind this, how money and greed and capitalism and recklessness, reckless men especially, was behind this. Do not let them do this to you. Do not let them shame you. Your anger is justified. And they're trying to be... How can you be angry? Don't you care about these grieving parents and dead bodies? We could do all this at once. Search and rescue can go out there, continue to risk their life and their mental health to recover bodies, while we, members of the public who pay these people's salary, hold their feet to the fire and want answers. And to blame your political opponents for natural disaster. Again, this is how men put you in danger, blame you for being mad at being in danger, and then eventually, if they save you, they will call themselves heroes for saving you from the very danger that they put you in. It happens on a personal level. It happens systemically. It's like they do with Pew Pew. Thoughts and prayers. How could y'all be mad? Moms demand action. That group demands action, not thoughts and prayers. People right now who know that climate change is only going to get worse. These floods are going to get worse. And the more marginalized you are and the poorer you are, the more you are on the front line of all this. So we don't want prayers. We want action. We want accountability. We want to know why this wasn't prevented, what you're going to do about it, why you can't spend $1,000 on siren. And then I want to finish on this, is when this NBC article talks about the difference between the town that had a siren, a wailing warning siren, versus the one who didn't. 0 deaths versus over 100. So they talked about this in this article, talked about this town of Comfort and how it had something that its neighbors upriver didn't. Wailing sirens urging residents to flee before the water could swallow them. They had only recently updated this disaster alert system. They were installed in the fire department's headquarters. Friday, the day of floods, was the first time new 2 siren system had been used outside of just tests. And it's basically a last-minute alarm, because there's other things. There's the texts. There's all these, you know what I mean? It's on social media. If you have a weather radio, they send you this is one thing, but it's the one thing that might get you if you're asleep and have your phone off. Don't have a weather radio, especially for people who had not responded to previous warnings on their cell phones or evacuation announcements from firefighters driving around town. People knew that if they heard the siren, they got to get out. In this town of only 2,300 people, no one died. But in Kerr County, 20 miles away, dozens of people died, including the girls at that Mystic Camp, Camp Mystic. 104, again, I forget what the final count is so far. Over 100 people have died, and at least 84 of them were in Kerr County. Kerr County has no siren system despite years of debate, in part because local officials felt it was too expensive to install. Now, look, I know, there's the whole federal component of tray and all of that, and the slashing of all of that. Okay, that's a whole nother thing. But I want to focus on the local, because this is a Republican-run state. And we know if there's one thing Republicans love to do, it's privatize things and slash funding and destroy institutional government stuff and give all that money to stuff that doesn't, to to millionaires, corporations, whoever. Basically anything but invest it back into the community to benefit the most people, especially the most vulnerable people. Now, obviously, it's impossible to know whether these sirens would work, that they would have prevented any of these deaths. We don't know, but it seems could have helped, even though they're meant to alert people who are outdoors, not in bed indoors. If I heard this thing going off, like the dogs would bark at this thing, like this thing could really help. And again, Kerr County was relying on emergency alerts that blare on cell phones. Those alerts may not get through, particularly in rural areas with bad service, or in the night when phones are off or when there are no phones around, like when the girls are not allowed to use them. Which again, I actually agree with that policy unless girls are in a floodplain or something dangerous. I mean, look at this. 13 people died on Memorial Day weekend in 2015, and that's when Tom Moser, he's the former Kerr County Commissioner, that he started looking into these warning systems because it's like, uh-oh. And then the officials debated it. A number of people did not like the sirens going off because they might go off accidentally. They didn't want the disturbance. March 2016, Rusty What's-His-Butt, the then Kerr County Sheriff, was adamant that the deadly floodings in the Hays County community was a warning for the need to install sirens in addition to phone app notification, known as Code Red, that is already in use. Because some people don't get alerts on their phones, so yes, you need both. Here it is. Here's his name, y'all. Commissioner H.A. Buster Baldwin. I'm sorry, you could not have a more perfect name for someone being this ridiculous. He questioned the flood warning system, saying this guy was like, it's a little extravagant. And back then, they're saying they estimated it could cost him $1 million. But again, other estimates say that a siren could cost $1,000 each. And then, of course, they didn't get funding. But then this one Republican state lawmaker, Wes Verdell, who recently voted against a bill that would have created the grant program to assist local governments in obtaining emergency community. He said on Sunday he would have voted differently given the latest flooding, but he insisted that the bill wasn't transparent enough. Instead, let's ramp up the cell phones. Let's build more. Do you have a contract? Do you own stock in cell phone towers, buddy? I kind of feel like these answers say really want anything but the sirens. I swear to God, but I wouldn't be surprised if this guy has donors. Like, God, it all comes down to that stuff, I swear. But whatever, I don't know. Unless you're outside, you can't hear them. What? I don't know, all the videos that I've seen. And also, as somebody who has literally been in a town who has one of these sirens that's in the middle of town. It's not all over town. It's in the middle of town. I can hear that on the other side of town. I wish I couldn't hear it because it scares the crap out of me every time I do. And the nice thing with an outdoor warning system, it's one of the few methods that local officials have at their disposal where they can literally press a button and warn citizens themselves. It's difficult to ignore a siren blaring for 3 minutes straight. And if you read this woman, she was in an RV park going barefoot, running around, trying to warn people in the dark. She recalled hearing screams in the dark, honks from cars floating in the river, cabins splintering against trees, like all this stuff. I don't know. I think I'd rather a siren than people running around barefoot trying to warn everyone. And why was this happening? Because the cell phone and internet service is often spotty. People have turned off their phone, various reasons, that a phone is not reliable enough. It could have helped, since she said, to have a siren like they do with tornadoes. Sirens go off and wake people up. So do not listen to these people who are like, no one to hear the sirens. Fork off. Ask people who live in tornado areas or literally any town in Europe in World War II that was getting bombed or whatever. I want to know, at the end of the day, why there were 386 campers who were, 7, 8, 9 years old, and 64 staff members staying at the river section of that camp on a floodplain and did not get the memo to get the hell out of those cabins earlier. I want to know why, because it sounds like a lot of these counselors were doing heroic level stuff as literal teenagers. But why were they caught off guard like that? Why didn't they know? That's what I want to know. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'll be back to making videos soon. I have so many things I want to talk about, but I'm trying to be with my family now. And as much as I'm obsessed with this story, I really need to stop reading about it while I'm with my family. And I only have a few more precious days with my family left before we move on. So that's where I've been. And thank you, Patreon people. Y'all are why I'm able to take time off to spend like this with family. And if you want to see what's going on this trip, I've been sharing stuff on Patreon, like more personal stuff that I don't feel like sharing with the whole world, as my private life is becoming more and more private as the internet becomes scarier and scarier as a woman online. So anyway, thanks for listening. I hope you all are doing okay. Please Google Swiftwater Rescue. There is a 17-page PDF. I think it's in like American Canoeiers Association or whatever. But this comes up when I literally, in quotes, Swiftwater Rescue. There are sites, you don't have to take a Swiftwater Rescue class, which you could, but there are sites that talk about how to deal with swiftwater, how to, what to look for, whatever. But if you remember nothing else, if you're trying to get across water, if you're stuck in a current, swim 45 degrees to the current. It's so much harder to swim across rivers or swiftwater if you are trying to fight the current. 45-degree angle, either upstream, downstream, whatever. Keep your feet up. Do not stand in water. Swift water above your knees. Do not stand in that. If it's a really strong current, please educate yourself. And don't, for the love of God, drive your car through water that's high. Every time I see a car floating down the river, all I think is there's got to be someone in there and they're going to die. It's so hard to get someone out of a car because most cars have electric windows, and you probably won't be alive by the time someone who could break that window is going to get to you. Please roll your window down, but don't drive through that water to begin with. Anyway, let me know if you want more on this. I'll try to find some resources if I can. Take care of yourselves, and I'll be back sharing more often soon. But I'm going to be continuing to take a lot of time off until I go back on July 20th. Anyway, I'm not doing a comment song. I'm sorry. It's too much. I can't do it while I'm doing this. If you know, you know. But thanks for listening. See you next time.